If you're watching this, you've decided to look further into the model behind my paper for social philosophy and policy called Three Concepts of Stability. I recognize that many of the philosophers reading will not be familiar with the program that I'm using, so I thought that I would try to explain a little bit of what my model is doing. I'll try not to hit you with a whole lot of net logo jargon. I just want to see if I can explain the ideas very simply. So in the paper, I mentioned the very first version of my model is called a simple, well-ordered society model, and that's what you see before you. In running the model, and this would just be a particular run where the results I have are the results of thousands of runs, we click Setup, and you'll see that it produces a large number of these little arrows, which NetLogo calls turtles. We can just call them agents. Now you'll see on this first parameter here that I can change the number of reasonable agents in the system. So it started at 50. So when I press Setup, it creates 50 agents. If I increased it to 100, it'd create 100 different agents. These next two parameters determine the basic disposition and decision-making heuristic of the agent. These agents, since they're reasonable, are not particularly focused on doing the best for themselves. They're essentially playing trust games. What they do is they cooperate with a certain probability, a probability that's calculated based on two factors. First, their intrinsic propensity to cooperate. That's what this is. If you have it at 0.9, that means that in the absence of any observation about what others are doing, they'll roll a 10-sided die with 9 cooperates and 1 defect, and however it comes out, that's what they'll do. That is, they'll cooperate 90% of the time. The payoffs that they receive are prisoner dilemma payoffs, but they do not act based on the payoffs. So the payoffs, when they decide to cooperate, are just the cooperative payoffs from a prisoner's dilemma. But the intrinsic propensity of the agent is only meant to represent their intrinsic liking of cooperation, how much they like it regardless of what others are doing. The agents will also make an observation over time. So if we start the model, and don't worry about what it's doing right now, I'll explain, and we go to inspect a turtle, which we can see, whoop, it's not letting me bring the, hold on. What each turtle is going to do is look at all the other turtles in the grid and try to determine who's cooperating and who isn't cooperating. All they can do is observe what each other agent has done in the previous turn or are doing in the present turn. The program is set up to where if an agent cooperated in the last turn, they display a 1, and if they defected, they display a 0. The observation that the agents make is the proportion of agents who cooperated in their last turn or who are cooperating at the present moment. So that just describes what I call their observation, or their obv variable, and that determines the probability with which they'll cooperate. So if intrinsic propensity were irrelevant, they would cooperate with a probability of cooperation from the other agents. If 60% of the agents are cooperating, it will cooperate 60% of the time. So these are the two basic inputs, and social sensitivity determines how they weight those two factors. At a social sensitivity of 1, the agent only pays attention to her observation. At 0, she only pays attention to her intrinsic propensity. When it's somewhere in between, say at 0.5, she weights them equally. So if her observation's 0.6 and her intrinsic propensity is 0.9, and we have an equal weighting, then she'll cooperate with what I call an effective propensity of 0.75 or 75%. So that's the basic feature of the agents and what happens as they interact and make decisions about how to interact. Now, given how simple the model is, we ought to be able to start to look at how the model functions. You'll notice here that we have an outline of something called social trust. And what social trust is it's just a reflection of of the effective propensities of the agents averaged out at a particular moment. So social trust at any one point in time is the average effective propensity of turtles in the system. And in the simple well-ordered society model, that is what we care about. We want to find the conditions under which social trust is high, and we want to find the conditions under which social trust is low, where social trust here is understood as how comfortable are the agents cooperating given their intrinsic liking of cooperation and their observations. Now that since the agents update their effective propensities over time, I wanted there to be a way to track this. And so the higher an agent's effective propensity is, the brighter she'll become. The less confident she is, the lower her effective propensity will be and the darker that she will become. So if we start again and we let them move at a regular speed, you'll see that as they interact and they have positive experiences, they become brighter. And what we can also see if you watch social trust is that they're starting to reach an equilibrium. So if we speed things up a bit, we can see, if you look at the levels of social trust, that we are more or less at an equilibrium point. And it turns out when you average it over time, the average level of social trust over time gravitates toward the intrinsic propensity of the agents. That is, since the agents all have the same intrinsic propensity to cooperate, due to their mutual observation of one another and the dynamics generated, they're going to tend towards that intrinsic propensity. Their effective propensity, that is, over time, averaged over the long run, will equal their intrinsic propensity. And that is the sort of political stability that I call durability in the paper. So the durability of a political system, whether it's durable in the right way, is whether over the long run it exhibits a high degree of social trust. So intrinsic propensity determines the durability of the system, which is one of the three concepts of political stability. Social sensitivity, on the other hand, correlates with what I call balance. So remember again, this is a weighting function. At 1, agents only care about their observations. At 0, they only care about their intrinsic propensities. So let's set their intrinsic propensity low. Now watch the pattern of social trust unfold. We can see that there's very little change in how much social trust there is. That is, the number tends to gravitate really closely towards intrinsic propensity. But if we set the intrinsic propensity very high, something else happens. So what you'll see as things go, and that there's a good bit more instability in the system. So there's a lot more variation among different levels of social trust. And in fact, this is clear at lower levels of intrinsic propensity, where they can be quite a bit of variation, much more than we see with respect to low social sensitivities. And this makes sense, I think. I mean, the more you care about your observations, the more that you're going to be willing to adjust in response to changing circumstances. And so you get a lot of instability, a great deal. In fact, what you could see now is things are falling pretty precipitously. They climb up really high. So that is what I call balance. This is a system with high durability and low balance. It's high durability because its intrinsic propensity is around 80%, and so its social trust levels is about 80%. But its balance is low because there's so much variation in the average level of social trust. So those are two of the three concepts of stability, both illustrated in the simple well-ordered society model. And we see that as intrinsic propensity increases, durability increases. As social sensitivity increases, balance falls. The system becomes more volatile. Now, I want to point out one more feature that will allow us to transition to the more complex versions of the model. Watch now the position of the agents with respect to one another. Right now, they're pretty widely spread. And it looks like they're moving more or less randomly, but I've actually set them up to do something a little different. what you'll see is that the agents tend to gravitate towards a central hub where they interact with each other quite a good bit. And you can see as we speed this up that the phenomenon continues. It doesn't ever go away. Now this is the element of what I'm calling network reciprocity, because I think it resembles what other game theorists and modelers are talking about. It's not that each agent is building a reputation with specific agents. Instead, in my model, what the agents do is they draw a vector by taking their present location and then finding the central x and y coordinates of all highly cooperative agents, or at least in this case, everyone who's displaying a 1 rather than a 0. So the agent will find, say, the particular place. She'll take her location and then she will orient herself in that direction. She won't move in that direction, she'll merely face in that direction, and since she's moving somewhat randomly, she'll tend to make her way there. But the dynamic of the system is that since all the agents are trying to find cooperative agents, they create a cooperative hub. This will be the feature that generates the third concept of stability, the idea of immunity. But of course, I can't explain immunity until I introduce another agent type. So I hope that all of this has been at least somewhat clear and will help you to understand the simplest elements of the model.